The Silver Bullet Podcast with your host, letter carrier, and shop steward, Pirate Jim.
My daddy was a miner, and I'm a miner's son. And I'll stick with the Union till every battle's won. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
With gratitude, mutual respect, and reciprocity, we acknowledge the ancestral home, culture, and oral teachings of the Treaty 7 signatories, which includes the Siksika Nation, Piikani Nation, Kaana Nation, the Ayithka Stony Nakota Nation, consisting of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Good Stony bands, and the people of the Tsuut'ina Nation. We also recognize the Métis people of Alberta Region 3, who call Treaty 7 their home. We respect all people who share, celebrate, and care for the Treaty 7 territory of Southern Alberta, and we honor the original caretakers of the land.
Aloha kako, welcome to the Silver Bullet Podcast. I'm Pirate Jim, and today it's a big day, and it starts in about, hopefully very soon, and the OGGO committee, they basically decide if public services, well, a whole bunch of things, but specifically crown corporations and that kind of thing will get money to run. They're basically given their budgets. And so with the transformation and all the other stuff happening, they're the ones that are going to have to approve spending for whatever is going to happen, whatever that is, right? So if that's to, I guess, continue putting in CMBs and all that other stuff, like there's all these expenses with doing the changes they want. All right, here we go.
While the government closes its eyes, the winds of change, I feel them coming. We'll shine the light on their disguise. No propaganda, no more spin. You won't divide us. People will see that your theater is just empty. I like your words, they once believed in the form of shining valleys where the pure air won't give up this fight from the trap. We will break free, not just for us, it's for the people, every Canadian, a legacy. Please help us save our identity. I was dreaming, in my dreaming, God knows a purer view. As I lay down into my sleeping, I commit my dreams to you. People have the power. People have the power. People have the power. Posties have the power to dream, to rule, to wrestle the world from fools. It's to free the people rule. It's to free the people rule. It's I believe everything we dream can come to pass through our unity. We can turn this thing around and bring back integrity. We have the power. We have the power. People have the power. Posties have the power. The power to dream, to rule, to wrestle the world from fools. It's to free the people rule. It's to free the people rule. We have the power. We have the power. Posties have the power. People have the power. We have the power. We have the power. We have the power. Posties have the power.
We're going to move right in because it has started, and we have Minister Lightbound. It looks like he's up first. So let's share that, shall we? Make sure I get the right window. Oh, that's the wrong one. Here we go. Sit back, enjoy. Because we're on a bit of a delay, I can stop and make comments. I'll try not to. I'll try to make it so it's only when it's appropriate. And did I get the right one? All right. Let's get this party started.
I'm pleased to be here as the Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada. It's an honor to be here. So I would like to thank the committee for giving me the opportunity today to discuss Canada Post, which is an essential institution for our country. It is an institution that Canadians love, and they are very attached to it, as am I. I think it's important that we have this discussion together.
Their valuable report entitled Canada's Postal Service, a lifeline for rural and remote communities. As Minister of Government Transformation, Public Works and Procurement, I welcome the work of this committee, and our government is committed to addressing their thoughtful recommendations. On Monday, October 20th, 2025, the government tabled its response to the committee's report, and I'd be pleased to discuss it later today. Mr. Chair, we are equally committed to seeing Canada Post survive through this existential crisis it is in, and I continue, as you all know, the labor dispute is ongoing.
I gotta stop this
I continue
already.
to urge
Because
both
did he
management
just say
and
they
the union.
tabled something and I was off in La La Land?
It's an institution that Canadians love, and they are very attached to it, as am I. I think it's important that we have this discussion together.
Their valuable report entitled Canada's Postal Service, a lifeline for rural and remote communities. As Minister of Government Transformation, Public Works and Procurement, I welcome the work of this committee, and our government is committed to addressing their thoughtful recommendations. On Monday, October 20th, 2025, the government tabled its response to the committee's report, and I'd be pleased to discuss it later today. Mr. Chair, we are equally committed to seeing Canada Post survive through this existential crisis it is in, and I continue, as you all know, the labor dispute is ongoing. I continue to urge both management and the union to find a path forward at the bargaining table. I've met over the course of the last weeks and months with both the union and management, and I know that they're both committed to finding a sustainable path for Canada Post, and I urge them to keep negotiating in good faith. Because Canada Post is an institution that needs saving, and at this junction in its history, and maybe more than ever, it's an institution that needs saving. Depuis maintenant près de 160 ans, et encore à
For
ce
almost
jour,
160 years now, the workers of Canada Post have connected Canadians in good and bad times, in small villages and big cities, often offering a life saver to these communities. Since 2018, Canada has accumulated about $5 billion in losses. In 2024 alone, it lost over $1.3 billion. And in January of this year, they required a $1 billion injection to keep the corporation operational.
Lost $407 million, which is their worst quarter ever. And at this point, the corporation is losing $10 million every day. In fact, with the labor unrest that it is currently facing, it's probably more than $10 million a day at this point. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Chair, that Canada Post is effectively insolvent.
He said,
Quand on regarde l'évolution du monde, il faut pas s'en surprendre. Le monde
And
de
when we
Probably
look at
losing
the
10 million.
evolution of the world, it's not surprising. We've seen a decrease in letter mail, which has gone from $5.5 billion, or rather 14. While they delivered to 14.3 million addresses in the past, today it's only 17.6, so it's gone.
billion letters per year. Today, that number is 2 billion. And 20 years ago, Canada Post delivered to 14.3 million addresses. Today, that number is 17.6 million. While Canada Post delivers fewer letters to more addresses, Canadians have been sending and receiving more packages than ever before, but they are increasingly turning towards private competitors. Monsieur le Président, Post Canada fournit un
Mr. Chairman, Canada Post provides an essential service to Canadians and in particular to rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. And Canadians rightfully want it saved. However, ongoing bailouts from the federal government to maintain the status quo is not the solution.
Given the current financial situation of Canada Post, the status quo and repeated bailouts by the federal government are not the solution. As a minister responsible, I must ensure that the overall direction of Canada Post aligns with the government's policies and objectives, and that implies making responsible but at times difficult decisions. This is why in September, I announced that the Government of Canada would accept the recommendations from the Industrial Inquiry Commission led by William Kaplan. This means making a series of changes to stabilize the financial situation at Canada Post, including flexibilities in delivery standards. Le ménage moyen au Canada ne reçoit plus que 2 lettres par semaine.
The average household now receives just 2 letters per week, yet operations are still designed for much higher volumes. Adjusting delivery standards will allow non-urgent mail to travel by ground instead of air, and will save more than $20 million a year to the corporation. This government has also removed the moratorium on the conversion to community mailboxes. 3/4 of Canadians already receive mail through community, apartment, or rural mailboxes, while 1/4 still receive door-to-door delivery. I've authorized Canada Post to introduce community mailboxes to approximately 4 million more addresses, which will ultimately save the corporation nearly $400 million per year.
We'll be lifting the rural moratorium imposed in 1994. The moratorium has not evolved in 30 years, but Canada has changed. Areas that used to be rural may now be suburban or even urban. It also means that multiple post offices operating near each other, including some just a few hundred meters apart, are required to stay open. I've instructed Canada Post to come back with a plan within 45 days of the announcement to protect service in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. And let me be clear. Canada Post has an obligation to serve all Canadians in every community in Canada, and that will not change. And I'm almost done. I'll I'll speak at my pace in question period, so I'll try to be a little faster. At last, the government is reviewing the process for increases to the stamp rate to modernize and shorten it in line with the Kaplan recommendations. Taken together, these measures will help stabilize Canada Post's financial situation by generating close to $500 million in savings per year. But there's more to do, and as such, I've also asked Canada Post to come back to me within 45 days with a plan on how they'll be taking immediate action to address its financial challenges, which means finding efficiencies, reducing costs, reducing overhead, and reviewing and lightening its management structure. Monsieur le Président, en conclusion, notre gouvernement...
Mr. Chair, in conclusion, there are choices that we need to make, and if we don't do anything, that's a $10 million in losses every day. Inaction is not an option. These are necessary changes to save Canada Post and put it on a sustainable footing, and that is what we are committing to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I forgot to welcome back Ms. Rejla and Mr. Rassi. I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I realize you've only been with us 40 times before. We're going to start our 6-minute round with Mr. Patzer. Go ahead, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Minister, for being here. I'm just wondering, did you have a chance to ever read and go over the 2017 report by this very committee?
Thank you very much for the question. There's been numerous reports on Canada Post and its future, so I've looked at many of them. I wouldn't say necessarily with the same detail that perhaps members of this committee have, but I did look at all the reports. And I will highlight that in the Kaplan report on which we base the changes that we've announced.
So someone who hasn't fully reviewed all the reports on Canada Post recently is going to make the decisions. The same guy who hasn't worn a satchel, who hasn't worked on a line, they prove our point.
September 25th, the commissioner has looked at all the reports, and in fact, there's one part of the Kaplan report which is titled "Studied to Death." I mean, the future of Canada Post has been studied over and over again, and by this committee, which I thank for the work, but also by other institutions and organizations over the years, and that has informed the decisions that we made to move forward with the transformation of Canada Post.
Okay, so recommendation number 1 from the 2017 report is Canada Post be maintained as a universal public service for all Canadians and conduct its operations on a self-sustaining financial basis while ensuring that profits generated are reinvested within the corporation. What went so wrong?
I think I've touched on it in my remarks, and you know what we see with Canada Post, we see across the world with different postal services where the volume of
Again, the politician here. He's not going to get into what went wrong because he doesn't know. He says, oh, wow, the drops of this. He uses the same garbage, the same propaganda that we hear over and over from the boss. Do we ever hear from this gentleman about the buying electric vehicles before we can charge them, before we have charging stations? And pilot programs that work that they refuse to do. They don't answer the question. Well, of course. This is why you don't vote for liberals or conservatives, because they just do this. They support each other.
Letter mail has declined substantially over the years. 5.5 billion 20 years ago to 2.2 billion. And what has been, I'd say the anchor for Canada Post is that it's got a monopoly on delivering letter mail. It's been the way that Canada Post has attained profitability over many years. However, as we've seen the decline in letter mail volume, as well as the rising number in addresses where it needs to be delivered, I think that accounts for what went wrong, to answer your question. But I would also add, and it's highlighted in the Kaplan report, that the organization has become too big for the volume that it needs to deliver, and it's been constrained.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to cut you off there just because, as you know, we only have limited time. Recommendation 15, that Canada Post continue investing in the growth of its parcel e-commerce services which provide needed infrastructure for Canadian businesses. You did highlight that Canadians are largely choosing other providers for parcels, and I'll note that one of them is even owned by Canada Post So how on earth could Canada Post not figure it out when one of their own subsidiaries is a profitable money-making company, and yet they can't even take that as a model and implement it for their own to be able to make money? Why is it
Finally.
like why is when there's
This
been
is
so
my
many
favorite
recommendations, so many
conservative
studies, so many
lately.
reports, and I think a big emphasis
I'll
has
shake his
been
hand.
on parcels and identifying that would be a path forward for them, and yet nothing's been done to address that for 10 years. Why is that?
I would suggest we are moving forward. The Kaplan report highlights some of what you've just mentioned. And in order for Canada Post to be competitive in the parcel business, it needs to be more agile, more flexible. And there are some things on which we as a government can do. And by that, I mean lifting the rural moratorium, lifting the moratorium on community mailboxes, which is what we're doing, changing the delivery standard, which we are doing, changing the way we increase the stamp rate in this country. But there are things on which we don't have power, and that would be the collective agreements, and that has to be achieved at the bargaining table. And I'm hoping that both parties, given the dire financial situation that Canada Post is in, will find an agreement by virtue of which Canada Post will be able to be competitive going forward.
All right. So he wants us to continue bargaining, but the thing is that the bosses brought us an offer that was forced upon us to vote on. We said no. And then we gave them an offer back. They came back with the exact same offer after waiting for this dude to then say, no, we're lifting the moratoriums on all this bullshit that makes us money. So after that, then they go, let's stall a few more days because we're going to make this offer even shittier. And that's exactly what they did. They made it shittier. And now they got us fighting each other over what we should be doing, and we should be out there, and then we go on strike, and then half of us get pissed off because we went on strike, and then we go back, and then these same people get pissed off because we go back. This is exactly what they want. They have us exactly where they want us. And you know what? We kind of put ourselves there. And none of us will take ownership for our little portion that we've done to make this happen. Anyhow, the point is these guys have no clue what the hell they're doing. And they're just making this tough for all of us, including Canadians.
In the parcel business, and reach a path towards financial sustainability.
So, I mean, why wait until they're in the middle of job action? I mean, it's gotten to the point, it's gotten so bad. It's not like this year and last year was the first years that they were losing hundreds of millions of dollars, right? I mean, it was pretty evident for even like years before COVID even hit. It was evident that this was the pathway that this was going down.
Sooner?
So why was it delayed up until this point when it's the middle of a job action and at a point where you even admitted in your opening remarks that as a company they're basically insolvent? So why wait so long to actually implement a plan on the future of Canada Post? Why?
Well, I think when you look at the evolution, if you look back at, for instance, when the moratorium was imposed on the implementation of community mailboxes 10 years ago, the financial situation of Canada Post was not the same. Hindsight, it probably should have gone forward. I agree with you on this. And however, I would argue that given that for the first time the federal government had to invest or inject $1 billion just to keep the lights on at Canada Post, and that in the foreseeable future the government will, at the pace at which it's losing money right now, we would, without any changes, would be in repeated bailouts. I think that warranted change and beginning the transformation of Canada Post, which is what we're doing, and I'm proud that we're taking that responsible decision.
So what political considerations went into you guys not implementing the plan until the 11th hour?
Listen, I've been minister for not even 6 months now, but
you've been an MP for 10 years, though. You've been in the government for the duration of the time.
Fault.
I think
Well, then get
when you
McKinnon
look
in.
at the evolution, which is what I've highlighted, where in 2024 for this year we've had to inject $1 billion, where
That has to be repaid
Canada
back.
Post just had this summer its worst quarter in history. I think it warranted the changes to transform Canada Post, and I think Canadians are generally on board with the changes we announced.
I knew they would do that. I knew he would do that. You can't use statistics from a summer when you're constantly pushing all of our shit to the competition, including Perlator. Okay, then. This summer was so terrible. How did Perlator do? What are the numbers, buddy? Bring your numbers. Bring your costing. Give me a break. I've only been here for 6 months, so, you know. And then it was Patty Haydu that first had the baton. And then it went to whoever. And now it's him. And they keep using industry and labor and jobs and all this. They keep intermixing it. And they're doing the dance of ministers just like us with our supervisors. You know? Anyway, we'll get to supervisors and APOC later. Anyway, enough excuses, Lightbound. How about you get the real information about Perlator for one?
Mr. Gasparo, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you for coming, Minister. I'm a little taken aback by some of the economics here in your presentation. $5 billion in losses, a burn rate of $10 million per day. Probably accelerating more quickly than that because of job
probably
actions,
worse.
as you pointed out. Do you think it's possible for Canada Post to get on a path of financial viability?
I think it is. It's not going to be easy, and it will take some time. But if you know, that's why I've tasked the corporation to come back with a plan to right-size itself, to take a look at its overhead, find ways to find efficiencies and how it's managed, but also
Without
asking both the union and management to negotiate in light of the financial situation Canada Post is in. I think there is a way, and just the changes that we've announced on September 25th. In term would generate savings close to $500 million a year.
How about
I
a
think that
marketing
goes
plan?
a long way in the initial transformation to reach financial viability for Canada Post. But there is definitely more work to do. But I think the first step to stop the bleeding, so to speak, were to go forward with these recommendations from the Industrial Inquiry Commission, which we've announced on September 25th.
Thank you. So, and maybe we can just drill down a little bit. What do you feel are the key priorities to ensuring that Canada Post is financially stable and provides quality service to all Canadians, regardless of their postal code?
I think as part of that, lifting the constraints that it's been operating under is really the first step. And when you look at, for instance, the rural moratorium, and I'll note that in reports from this committee, it was often highlighted that this needed to be updated. It will allow for Canada Post to look at ways to be more efficient. This moratorium was implemented in 1994, hasn't changed one iota in the last 30 years. And as I've highlighted, some of the rural post office that are included in the moratorium, which might have been rural 30 years ago, are now by any stretch of the imagination, suburban, in some instances urban.
Okay, so because they're urban, now you're going to privatize them or, put them in shoppers. And here's the thing that dawned on me the other day, right? And I'm all about the community hubs. If you've watched the show before, you hear I preach community hubs like crazy because it's community, right? And we're public service. So we have community hubs already established and up and running and I would say making money, but they could be making more money by adding on, just like at the RPO clear in Silver Springs, Calgary, Northwest. When you go and turn around from that counter, Canada Post counter, that is run by a Shoppers Drug Mart employee or a Sobeys employee, if it's at Sobeys, not one of us, not someone who's getting pensions and covered by a collective agreement. No, you have someone who's being kind of, in my opinion, being tormented in a retail job. Anyway, so you get your parcel out there and then you turn around to leave to go out of Shoppers Drug Mart. And guess what's there? It's like a whole refrigeration cooler thing that's got milk and cheese and cottage cheese and juices. And then right around there is bread. Grocery items, right? So why the hell is Shoppers Drug Mart using us to make profits because the people are coming to go to the post office. We should be making a cut of that. Maybe we are. Maybe that's part of the. I never thought of that. Maybe there's a franchising fee. Regardless, we'd be making a lot more if those were our groceries that we were selling at cost. Why? Because we can sell groceries at cost because we're a crown corporation with the funding of the government. Our purchasing power is incredible. Our purchasing power would beat out all of the other big guys, Sobeys and Shoppers and all that. In fact, we should be purchasing where these post offices are in the Sobeys and the Shoppers Drug Mart. So Avi Lewis, who's running for the leadership of the NDP, he's talking about public grocery stores. The gentleman running for the mayor of Mandani, right, down in New York, he's talking about public grocery stores. I'm talking about public grocery stores in Canada Post community hubs and post offices, especially in rural areas, especially up north, because we can sell it at cost. There's no profit margin anymore. We're not feeding the pockets of Weston, whatever his name is. I want to say Dressler, but that's a football player. Anyway, Anyway, none of that's going to get talked about here, of course, because why would you talk about how to increase sales? It blows my mind. Why would you think of that? It's a business. Why would you want to focus any time on making customer service?
Given an example in BC, where on the plot of land where a post office sits, where it's covered under the moratorium, hundreds of housing units could be built, but nothing can be done because the moratorium is in place. So lifting it will allow this flexibility, and it will allow Canada Post to right-size itself, given the changing nature of the letter mail business. And, Canada Post is not alone in this situation. If you look at the situation in the US and France and Denmark, they were stopping letter mail service altogether for the most part.
The other places that it's working?
Instances on islands. But I think that the change that we're announcing is the initial step that is definitely needed to stop the bleeding, because $10 million a day, I think, by any stretch of the imagination, is not reasonable, is not acceptable to Canadians. And I think, lifting these constraints will allow for the corporation to find ways to right-size itself.
And there's definitely, obviously, a global shift going on in the parcel business.
Loaded question.
The stats you laid out make it very clear, and this isn't unique to Canada. Having said that, I've heard from my constituents in Eglinton Lawrence who are worried about the transition to community mailboxes, especially for seniors and people with mobility issues. Are there accommodations in place for Canadians who won't be able to access their community mailboxes?
That's a very pertinent question, and to that effect, just in my own writing,
yes, there is accommodations.
Might as well say the writing, because it's all part of the
my own beautiful writing of Louis Hébert, the best writing in the country, in all impartiality.
I may have to call a point of order on that, Mr. Chair.
Grant, no, denied. But honestly, in my own writing, 77% of my constituents still receive door-to-door delivery. So, the community mailboxes will, impact my constituents. However, when you look at the broader picture in Canada, 77% of Canadians already receive mail through community or rural mailboxes or in apartment buildings. That said, and I've made it clear to Canada Post that as they move with this transition to community mailboxes, they absolutely need to make sure that the communities which will transition need to be informed of the accommodation program in place for Canadians with mobility issues, because there is a program that exists. I think it needs to be well advertised. It needs to be known by all those who might require it. And if it needs to be enhanced, then it should be enhanced. So
okay.
I'll be monitoring closely how
while you're advertising to Canadians about the accommodations you can have at a CMB, how about you should market and offer Canadians 75% off of parcels off of the Canada Post price would be a fantastic deal. How about you do that too? How about you send sales teams to every single business in Canada? How about that? There's a marketing idea for you.
Operates this transition.
Brilliant.
Because it's important for all Canadians to have access to their mail.
That's our time. Thanks very much.
you.
Madame Gaudreau, please, for 6 minutes.
Bienvenue. Welcome
Oh, Block.
to
Come
OGGO,
on,
Minister.
Block. Let's go, Block.
In fact, this is an opportunity that we have to
She's on our side.
that you have to answer various citizens and workers' questions. If I start with the rural situation and vitality in the regions, what is the plan? Obviously, we're going to have an answer that says we're already starting this, but for people who are very worried today when they're told that the moratorium's been lifted. Well, thank you for the question. It's an excellent one, Ms. Gaudreau. When we say we're lifting the moratorium, that can raise concerns for people. And I want to be very clear in the directions I gave to Canada Post, which is to protect the service to rural and remote and Indigenous communities. That's fundamental, and I expect that principle will be respected in the plan they put forward. In terms of the moratorium, the one that hasn't changed since 1994 has created situations that are hard to understand. And I could give you a list, but in some communities, I'm thinking of Richmond Hill, which isn't necessarily rural today. Perhaps it was 30 years ago. But there are post offices that are covered by the moratorium and that might have other service points, sometimes just across the street. So raising or lifting the moratorium will indeed allow reasonable level of service to exist across.
This excuse a lot. That's the first one they usually bring up is how, well, but they're so close to each other. We've got some that are so close. We could just make them, bring them together, create a community hub in downtown, wherever this is. You can have a fantastic community hub, grocery store with charging station. I mean, I don't know downtown. No, charging stations, business. Of course, you could have a couple you could have business offices at cost. Rent that's affordable for nonprofit societies to have an office space and such in downtown Calgary. I just thought of that. These guys never have any ideas. So instead, we're going to lift the moratorium so that these guys who always sneak in shit, like SSD, can then have just that little bit of an opportunity to shut shit down. And they're not going to shut shit that should be shit down. Like, they're not going to just close the ones that are close together. They're not. We're not that stupid. Canadians, that is.
Across the country, where there's not necessarily that sort of anomaly while preserving services to rural communities. I had good discussions with the Union of Municipalities in Quebec on this subject because I understand the concerns. Often the post office is an essential link in many communities, and I'm well aware of that. It's really not what we're targeting with the moratorium. Well, Mr. Chairman, you have to understand, and Minister as well, that there's been a study done, and it's going to be implemented across the board. And from the 25th of September, we weren't expecting that there would be such a lifting. So people should have been consulted, whether it's the people
public
who
mandate review.
live in vulnerable situations.
From October to March 2026.
Or when it's people who are saying, okay, I'm thinking of Francine in Mont-Roland. She's retiring in 5 years. There are other post offices that are nearby, but am I going to lose my job? What do we say to these people? So you must have some idea today. Well, as I said, it's really an effort to target post offices that are more in the suburbs, that are not really rural and remote. And in terms of jobs, the idea, and this comes really from the operational perspective of Canada Post, we'll have more information in the plan they put, but I think there are many postal workers who will be retiring in a few years and are worried. So part of that transformation will happen through attrition. I'm convinced of that. But I think that when we look and at consultations, there were many reports. A lot of work has been done at this committee. There was the Kaplan report, which is very extensive.
A lot of bias work.
And I think that all of the previous reports enlightened his work. The recommendations that he put forward
Lots of money spent.
at the end of his work, I think, are useful to begin this transformation. Because, in my opinion, once the corporation is losing $10 million a day and has just had its worst quarter, to tolerate the status quo even longer.
He said probably 10 million.
I know that it's been the subject of exchanges between the two of us, because you said we're intervening in the midst of a conflict for these parties. But the transformation has to begin. Also, the negotiations have to happen in light of this financial situation of Canada Post. Okay, so the concerns of workers, I mean, what's going to happen if indeed we maintain the service for letter mail? And I'm thinking about municipalities that still use them. They really need that. But I'm thinking of remote regions, northern communities. Mr. Chairman, it took a whole story just for our witness last week to be able to send them the headset and microphone to. We had to delay her appearance because she couldn't receive it. So people are worried. They haven't had news since September 25th. So what is the surprise going to be in the next few days? Well, what I'm saying is the directive to Canada Post is very clear. They have to respect the service standard for delivery in rural. Well, it's an essential service for us. So, you know, the idea of moving forward with these changes is precisely because for us, Canada Post is an institution that is vital to this country and perhaps even more important to Canada than in other countries. And in Quebec, given the vastness of the territory, and given that we have communities, because of geography, are farther than others, they need those services. For me, I wanted to ensure that we could save Canada Post and keep a good level of service to those communities. And that is the goal of the changes that we are trying to make.
Bullshit. They're going to take it and take
Mrs.
advantage
Block,
of
please.
us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to cede my time to Mr. Boulerice.
Oh, yes.
Certainly.
She
Mr. Boulerice,
rocks.
welcome
She's
back
from
to OGGO.
Calgary.
Floor is
Another
yours for 5 minutes,
drop-in
please.
conservative.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Minister.
Boulerice.
I'm disappointed and sad as well. A few years ago, you were against cutting home delivery, and now you've changed your mind. So the direct result is going to be cutting service to 4 million people in Canada who will no longer have the right to the service they had before because you changed your mind. My first question is very simple. I represent Rosemont, Sainte-Patrie. It's a rural riding. You're going to impose community boxes on everyone there by cutting the service that people have been used to having for decades. So, simple question. In my riding, where are you going to put those community boxes?
And how much is it going to cost to do so?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm very surprised to see this collaboration between the Conservatives and the NDP. So I salute you, Madam Block, for sharing your time, and I'm pleased to answer your
'cause
question.
it's about
First of all,
Canadians,
what I'd
sir.
say is that 67 or 77% of Canadians already receive their mail in community mailboxes, including in rural areas and in apartments. Secondly, when you say today you're in favor of something whereas 10 years ago you weren't, the reality is that 10 years ago, Canadians were receiving much more letter mail at home than they receive today.
No.
On
10 years
average, a
ago?
household in
I delivered
Quebec
about the same
now
amount.
receives 2 letters a week compared to 7 back then. Microphone, please. 7% is a a percentage that is not quite reflective of the situation. You're counting apartment buildings. I'm talking about letter mail at home. But the specific question you're not answering, where are you going to put these community mailboxes in Rosemont Patrie? Are you going to put them in schoolyards? Are you going to put them in studios? Are you going to rent spaces somewhere? Where are you going to
How
put
much
them?
will it cost?
Well, I can't answer you for one specific
has no
community,
idea.
but I know that they have transitioned to these mailboxes in communities for areas that formerly received their letter mail at home. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, in my own riding, a lot of people, the majority, are favorable given the change of reality. They're all right to receive their email in community in these boxes, these community mailboxes.
Door to door or something?
Delivering mail to a home is $279 million a year compared to $157 for community mailboxes. So I think reasonable Canadians who are looking at the financial situation of Canada Post are saying that that's not too much to ask to go and get your mail in a community mailbox, given that financial reality. You're not answering the question. Are you going to rent spaces to put community mailboxes in Rosemont La Petite Patrie? It's going to cost you something. So I don't see how the situation is better with the figures you just gave me now. I asked you a question. I only have 5 minutes, and I have one more question. The last year of profitability for Canada Post was 2017. You were in power then, and you let things fall apart since. So the financial situation is bad. But you're always talking about letter mail, but you don't talk about parcels. Canada Post formerly had 60% of that market, and now they only have 20%. You did nothing. So why did you let this happen, this death by 1,000 cuts? Well, there are several reasons that explain that, particularly the constraints under which Canada Post has to operate, particularly the fact that they have little flexibility for weekend deliveries, and to have that possibility when we know what Canadians are expecting. And then we're not talking about just parcels. They want rapid delivery of everything. So I hope that the union and management will manage to agree on something that will make Canada Post much more competitive in terms of parcel delivery. What the union several people has suggested for years, and now the Liberal Party did nothing. Ms. Armstrong, who is a professor at the University of Toronto, who said that an expansion of the postal service, as they did in Japan for many years, could have brought in extra revenue to Canada Post. And a poll that was done at a UN agency said that 84% of countries offer financial services through the post, and that's more revenue that could have helped Canada Post, and the Liberal Party did nothing for that either. So why do you obstinately refuse to offer a banking service that could have create more jobs?
Mr. Billeries, but perhaps on another round, or perhaps with Ms. Rochford. 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis,
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Nipissing Temiskaming, which is a rural urban riding to some extent. A number of citizens have mentioned to me how they find you to be an excellent communicator. And as a result of the manner in which you, yes, so, and I actually personally think the same thing. And so I'd like to add that to that comment.
Thanks for wasting the time on that.
And certainly I think what I have found is that the citizens with whom I've spoken, and they basically understand the need for change. I think the communication has been in such a manner that people understand. Yet, I have many seniors and rural communities that want to make sure that there will be continued service and that there will be a Canada Post that moves forward. And so basically, I've heard the term it's a vital organization, and no one puts that into dispute. And so the need for change is understood, and that it's a vital organization that needs to survive is equally very present, I find, in my community. At the same time, people appreciate that we're in a digital world that's changing very quickly. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you view the role of Canada Post in the future, in this, I guess, in this digital economy in which we live.
Okay, so first off, I'd like to thank your constituents. Now I'm reassessing, and of course, my writing is, of course, the best, but I would argue yours is second best now. And you know, and it goes to answer the previous question from MP Boulris. In my mind, and it's in line with Commissioner Kaplan's report.
Because he's an expert.
If we are to talk about Canada Post's future and maybe how it can evolve in the next 10, 15, 20 years, it first has to be efficient at its primary mission, which is connecting Canadians, delivering mail, delivering parcels, and delivering services in rural, remote communities. But I think the work of this committee, and certainly will be useful in looking at, what could be done with Canada Post over the next, in the long term. But I think in the short and medium term, it's important for us, if we are to be responsible, to stop the hemorrhage, stop the bleeding, given that Canada Post is currently losing $10 million a day, that it's reported its worst quarter in history in Q2 of this year. And I think Canada Post, Canadians are on board with this transformation. They realize that the world has changed. As you've mentioned, it's gone digital in the most, at a pace, and COVID has accelerated that.
So we should have more
at such a fast pace that Canada Post needs to adapt. Instead of cannot be stuck in a business model that was designed for the 90s. It needs to adapt to today's reality.
Yeah, it works
so I think that, and just on one other thing you mentioned, Mme. Rochefort, which is near and dear to my heart and is important for the government, for Canada Post, and for Canadians, is as we transition to community mailboxes, it's essential that Canadians with mobility issues still have access. And the accommodation program, which is maybe not as well known as it should be, has to be fully advertised so that all Canadians have access to a reliable postal service.
It's interesting because I was going to do a test in my community about the accommodation program in the months to come to exactly how it works, so I can convey it to the citizens who are in need of that service. But quickly, just maybe a few on the impact that you see on business, the business community.
And when Canada Post, when the postal workers were on strike before Christmas of last year, I think you could definitely feel the impact on small businesses. And I think it goes to show how essential a service Canada Post provides, in particular to small businesses. To this point, I'll just reiterate what I've said many times, but I'm hoping that it doesn't fall into deaf ears, both for management and the union. We need to find an agreement. The sooner, the better. And finding an agreement between both parties will lift the uncertainty that has plagued Canada Post, plagued its revenues.
All right, sorry, folks. It's good that we kind of stopped there, because he just said that it shows how essential we are. Well, expand the services, buddy, instead of killing it.
And will offer the kind of certainty that small businesses need as they operate.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. We get to go again.
Madame Gaudreau for 2.5 minutes and perhaps 30 seconds from Miss Rochefort.
I'd like to look a bit beyond the midterm. I imagine that you're aware of the German model for the post office, because in the 1990s, they decided to let it be absorbed by DHL. But when I look at this, it makes me think of Canada Post and Purolator, and a lot of people are thinking about this. Are you ready to tell us today that you don't want to weaken Canada Post so that they end up being absorbed by Purolator?
There we go.
100%. Canada Post has a very different mission than Purolator. They have the universal service model, the obligation to serve rural and remote communities, and indeed, through this announcement, we were often asked the question, why not privatize Canada Post? And I mean,
that's what you want.
To my thinking, it's impossible, unthinkable, given the essential service that it offers. We have to ensure that the corporation is on a financially sustainable and viable path, and that's why we announced the changes we did. Now, I think that in allowing more flexibility to Canada Post, particularly in terms of lifting these moratoriums, we'll see how it continues. But I hope that with that additional flexibility,
2 times,
with weekend delivery, for example. If the union and the management can agree on that, we'd have service that is not only essential, but also is competitive in terms of parcel delivery as well. So I think it's desirable for everyone. Well, I remain to be very concerned because the competition is fierce. And in fact, I wasn't aware of it before, but my predecessors here had said to me, how many studies have there been and so on. And now they say, but September 25th has arrived and we're talking about exponential growth. So when we talk about reducing the costs, if we all agree that this is an essential service, well, it's rather an issue of saying how are we going to deal with the competition?
Yes.
Because if we can't get parcels through them, we're going to go through the business next door. Whereas if I have to drive for an hour, I mean, it's not going to be an hour,
Yes,
I
it will for some
understand, in most rural areas, but people want services quickly and efficiently. So how are we going to manage this? I would.
Are we back? Okay. We're back. I'll back
would
that
say
up
the
for 10
Canada
seconds.
Post's strength want services quickly. And if I have to drive for an hour, I mean, it's not going to be an hour, I understand, in most rural areas, but people want services quickly and efficiently. So how are we going to manage this? I would say the Canada Post's strength is its huge network. And so the weakness is the same thing, and we have to find a balance between the two.
Wonderful answer.
Monsieur le Ministre, les Canadiens comptent
Mr.
sur...
Minister, Canadians count on Canada Post, not only for mail, but for daily life. Whether they're prescriptions or deliveries from small businesses come to our communities. And yet, for years, Canada Post has stated that its hands are tied by the rules imposed by the government. Why does this government act only now to save a system that for a long time has not functioned properly?
Prescriptions, small business deliveries, and community connection. Yet, for years, Canada Post has had their hands tied by the very rules set by the government. So why is this government only acting now to save a system which was clearly not working for years?
First of all, Ms. Jensen, I take my hat off to you for your excellent question in French. That's admirable, and I greatly appreciate that. I would respond in saying two things. First, the reality has changed over the last 10 years. As I've already said, the letter mail volume has decreased. The financial situation of Canada Post has gotten worse. And I think that means that now more than ever, the changes we announced are important. They're justified and justifiable. And now I'd also say that following the election of April 28th, I'm part of a government, and I'm proud of that, that is wanting to take responsible decisions, sometimes difficult and courageous,
responsible for workers
to
and
ensure
Canadians.
the viability of Canada Post.
Not responsible for the elite.
Okay, so
like Kaplan.
you've been in the government for 10 years as an MP and as parliamentary secretary, and the problems at Canada Post didn't appear just yesterday. So why, I just don't understand, why just now sound the alarm when Canadians are wondering if everyone at the table
Because
saw
of
warning
us.
lights flashing, why did it take a decade for anyone in the
Because they
cabinet
can
to
make
grab
more
the
money
wheel?
this way. They can destroy it
Yeah, well,
and
on
make
this,
money here
I'd
and there
say
in little
I'm as I've highlighted, the reality has changed over the last 10 years. And, you know, if you look back 10 years ago when the moratorium on community mailboxes was imposed, the volume of letter mail was not the same. The financial situation of Canada Post was not the same. And I think now more than ever, these changes are warranted to put the corporation on a more sustainable financial footing. And as I've mentioned, in hindsight, if you look back, I think these changes were warranted in many instances. And I think it's good that we're moving forward now. And I'm glad that I'm part of a government that's willing to make the difficult decisions, show political courage, and move forward with these changes that we've announced on September.
And expand services.
I
if
want to
you're
run out of
so
time.
freaking
I have one
full
question
of
actually for
courage.
real quick. just leadership means acting before a crisis, not after. And so after 10 years in and around the cabinet table, I guess we're wondering why should Canadians believe that suddenly today there's the political will to fix the problem that your government helped to create?
As I've mentioned, the reality has changed and the world has evolved. And I think the pandemic accelerated much of those changes that we're discussing today, whether it's the decline in letter mail volume, the digitalization of our lives. And I think that, warrants the changes that we've announced on September 25th. And I would also argue that and thank William Kaplan for his report, which I think is a very thorough report and outlines the immediate steps that need to be taken to stabilize the financial situation at Canada Post. And I'm proud to be part of a government that's moving forward with these with the recommendations in the Kaplan report.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sutz, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being with us today, and obviously for the attention that this file and this issue with Canada Post has taken. You just mentioned, the pace of digital change in Canadians' lives. So I've heard you describe Canada Post as a vital national institution that is worth preserving. And when you put that in the context of the pace of digital change and an increasingly digital world, I'm wondering what role you view Canada Post having in that new world where digital is taking over.
Well, I think this will warrant, and Canada Post is owned by Canadians. And I think looking at the future of Canada Post, it's important that we review its mandate with an idea of what Canada Post will look like in 10, 15, 20 years. How can it, better adapt and offer services that make sense to Canadians as the world changes? And I'll be looking forward to hear from Canadians, hear from hopefully this committee at some point as well on what this can look like. But given the financial situation, given the losses in Q2, given the $10 million a day, and I hear now it's even more than that, to me it was important, and to the government it was important to move quickly, decisively.
Okay, you just said that today I find out that it's even more than 10 million a day. Well, you didn't. What?
Changes we've.
Why does it keep going to that? Anyway. You said 10 million, then you said, well, probably more than 10 million. And now I've heard today that it's more than 10 million. That really, that's very Trumpy, isn't it?
Announced to put the corporation on a sustainable financial footing, to give it the opportunity to right-size itself, transform itself,
with
and
no increase of sales,
to be efficient at what Canadians expect Canada Post to do, which is connecting Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I know we've talked a little bit about Royal today, but I know even myself, I have the village of Carp as part of my riding of Canada. And there is questions as to what service will look like in rural parts of our country. And so can you share your thoughts or where you think service levels are going with respect to our rural communities?
Well, the directive I gave Canada Post was crystal clear as they, operate under this new paradigm where the rural moratorium that's been in place for 30 years, that hasn't changed in 30 years. So as they operate now without the constraint of this moratorium, I've made it crystal clear to the corporation that their obligation to serve Canadians and provide a good level of service comparable to what Canadians in urban areas get is paramount. And I'm looking forward to see how they intend to operationalize it. But as I've mentioned, the idea of lifting the moratorium is really because some of the communities, some of the post offices that are covered under the moratorium and have been covered for 30 years used to be rural but are now suburban, urban, and the list of examples is fairly lengthy across the country, and it makes for
now
incongruencies.
In Tuscany and Calgary, where I used to live in that community, we have RSMC still, and the post office is in Sobeys. I mean, maybe it's not on the list, but so there's one in Sobeys, and then there's one in Tuscany, and then there's one at Crowfoot, and then there's one in Silver Springs where I live. So I guess based on the formula that I don't know offhand of how close these things will be together, but are they going to, I don't know. Well, say that these 3 post offices are within whatever circumference, that whatever, to conglomerate them into one. Will that happen? Might as well just buy the whole Sobeys store then and make money off of groceries as well as mail. But, you know, why? Why do anything for this company that makes money? Why do anything logical that we're already doing in 4 places with community hubs? Why do that anywhere? Why? Because it doesn't work? It works.
Where you would have communities where you have a post office and a point of service across the street in suburban Canada.
Excellent. Thank you for
Suburban.
that. Certainly
That's what
an
they're gonna
important
do.
consideration, which
They're gonna-
you're obviously on top of. During your announcement in September, you indicated that reviewing the process for increases to the stamp rate to modernize and to shorten it in line with Commissioner Kaplan's recommendations was an important piece. So I'm curious the status of that review, if you have any update or any specific
have
barriers that there are to a shorter
plans
stamp rate increase
To
process.
increase income on stamps?
I'll be happy to report that there are no barriers. We'll be moving forward with an expedited process that will allow Canada Post to increase the stamp rate. And you know, it's an important point because the time it takes to increase the stamp rate to better reflect the actual cost of delivering mail and the burdensome aspect of that process has made it so that the stamp rate in Canada has not kept pace with what other countries have done. If you look at comparisons, we're way down compared to other countries in terms of the price of stamps in Canada. So I think giving that flexibility to Canada Post to move quickly and to alleviate, and as part of our red tape reduction process, that'll be included. So we're moving forward with that.
Thanks,
Okay.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll go to Mrs. Block. Then we'll have one more intervention from the Liberals, and then we'll finish up with Madame Gaudreau for 2.5. Go ahead, Mrs. Block, for 5.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for joining us, as well as your departmental officials. In your opening remarks, and I've heard you repeat it a few times during your answers to my colleagues, you say that Canada Post is losing $10 million a day or more.
Probably.
Given that Canada
Do that
Post
in
has reported a $1.5 billion operating loss, which works out to about $4.1 million a day, where exactly are you getting the $10 million a day figure from?
So we've had extensive communications with Canada Post Chief Financial.
The internet hates me. The internet is against us as well as the Liberals. Because obviously the Conservatives are slowly coming on board, which is fantastic if we have to go to voting on things like Section 107.
Exactly are you getting the $10 million a day figure from?
Yes.
So we've had extensive communications with Canada Post Chief Financial Officer.
Oh, cook the books guy.
You know, this is on a daily basis currently. That's what they're losing. In fact, it's probably more at this point. And this is largely due to the labor unrest that we've seen in the last 20 months, truth be told. Because just if you look at, you know, when flyers and commercial mail is not sent, that impacts the bottom line. It's $1 billion in revenue for Canada Post. Okay. So all this taken together accounts for this very high number, 10 million. But you know, I'm hearing it's way higher right now.
Did you like that? Oh well, we're losing $10 million a day right now because of the labor unrest. But most of us are working except for 1 or 2 small post offices, and we've been back now 2 weeks almost. Off for 2 weeks. 9 months. We're still here. We're still delivering the mail. And we're losing money because they are sending the business to Perlator. Ugh. And now we're losing connection to the Parliament. Oh boy, look at that. We got Ian Lee coming up. Stay tuned, folks. Stay tuned. If you can, if you don't keep getting pushed off. Oh, wow. Ian Lee's coming. Okay. Well, let's back this up a little because we got disconnected in the middle of me speaking.
For Canada Post. Okay. So all this taken together accounts for this very high number of 10 million, but I'm hearing it's way higher right now, though the 10 million has been duly verified. I can't speak to the numbers I've heard recently, so I won't go there, but I think it speaks to the importance for the union and management to reach a deal, negotiated deal, the sooner the better.
Thank you. You also mentioned the recent study that this committee undertook. And as you may be aware, while Conservatives agreed with the recommendations that were submitted in that report, we also submitted a supplementary report, specifically which noted the testimony of Canada Post CEO, who noted that the federal government failed to approve their strategic plan from 2019 to the date of his testimony. And so I'm wondering if you would advise us, what were the political reasons behind vetoing the independent strategic plan submitted by Canada Post over the last 5 years?
I can only speak for my tenure as minister. I've approved their latest corporate plan, and it's my intention that corporate plans be approved and submitted and available for review by parliamentarians on a yearly basis as we go forward, because I think it's important for Canadians to see how the transformation is going.
Right. Okay. Were you made aware that their plans had not been approved from 2019 to 2024?
Defer to the Deputy Minister on this one.
Yeah, I think that those corporate plans have been reviewed and looked at from the Treasury Board, who provides an annual overview of that. And I think some of the considerations were around how best to manage the fiscal situation and some of the issues that were faced with the labor unrest.
Do you think you did that, given where Canada Post is today, by not approving their strategic plan over the last 5 years? I'm just going to leave that question there. Minister, you've talked about Canada Post now in a process of right-sizing itself. How many additional jobs do you expect will be lost under this right-sizing, and over what timeline?
That's a question best asked to Canada Post, who's in charge of the operations. I'm not. However, I think even as the government is going through a comprehensive expenditure review where we're, looking at efficiencies across government, I think it's only fair to expect the same thing from Canada Post, and even more so given that they're losing so much money. So I'm looking forward to see their plan. It's forthcoming. I think they have about 20 days left to bring that plan back. But on the specific numbers you're asking, it's best asked to the corporation in charge of the daily operations of Canada Post.
So at no time while you were preparing to make these announcements that happened on September 25th, you took into consideration the impact on the workforce that your
he doesn't think
announcements would
about
have?
people. They only think of numbers.
Well, that's not correct. Of course, it's something, when you look at the organization, Canada Post has a very big structure that is designed to deliver volume that are not existent today. So I think it's only fair to
increase
ask
the volume by going out and getting
to
sales.
right-size itself, given the nature of letter mail today.
So you announce a plan and then tell them to right-size themselves without knowing exactly what the cost to the workforce might be.
Welcome to Canada Post.
Well, on that note, I'm not in charge of the daily operations of Canada Post. Management is, so I think that's a question best asked for management.